Welcome to the Scottish Rite Journal Podcast, an audio presentation of the Scottish Rite Journal, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. This week's article is The 100th Anniversary of the George Washington Masonic National Memorial, Cornerstone Laying, and the Scottish Rite, by Chris Ruli, 32nd degree KCCH, and Sean E. Iyer, 32nd degree KCCH, and comes from the January-February 2023 issue of the Scottish Rite Journal. On November 1st, 1923, Freemasons from across the United States gathered in Virginia to participate in a special Masonic Cornerstone ceremony. They assembled in the heart of Alexandria, a city located 3 miles south of Washington, D.C., on the banks of the Potomac River, and marched up to Alexandria's highest point, Shooter's Hill. There, in front of the visiting dignitaries and the public, including Presidents Calvin Coolidge and William H. Taft, the Masons laid the first stone of the George Washington Masonic National Memorial. This remarkable moment in American Freemasonry came about through unprecedented cooperation between the state Grand Lodges and national appendant bodies, including the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. As we mark the memorial's Cornerstone Centennial of 2023, let us take a brief look back at the prominent Scottish Rite Masons who supported this monument to George Washington, his virtues, and our fraternity. Members of George Washington's mother and affiliated lodges in Virginia, Fredericksburg Lodge No. 4 and Alexandria Washington Lodge No. 22, made several unsuccessful attempts during the 19th century to develop a suitable public memorial to Washington. By 1812, Alexandria Washington Lodge had accumulated enough ephemera related to the president that it opened one of the earliest public museums to Washington, the Alexandria Washington Lodge Museum. The Washingtonia exhibit remained open until May 1871, when a fire destroyed the Lodge Hall and a significant portion of the original collection. In 1907, Charles H. Callahan, the Lodge's senior warden and the City of Alexandria's Commissioner of Revenue, proposed that his brethren undertake construction of a new fireproof temple that would also house a proper museum. The Lodge agreed and sought the Grand Lodge of Virginia's assistance to raise funds and engage with other Grand Lodges to contribute. On February 22, 1910, representatives from 26 Grand Lodges gathered in Alexandria to form the George Washington Masonic National Memorial Association. They set an ambitious campaign target of $1 million, or $32 million adjusted for inflation, with half going towards a new building and the rest for an endowment to fund the memorial's activities. Designs were drawn up for a relatively modest 2-floor temple with a museum on the ground floor, while the second or top floor would house meeting space. Delegates elected the association's board of directors and agreed to meet annually, around George Washington's birthday, to provide regular updates on the memorial's progress. By 1922, the association abandoned its 2-floor proposal for a much grander monument and brought on architect and Freemason Harvey W. Corbett from the New York firm Helm & Corbett to draft new designs. Corbett drew inspiration from the famous lighthouse or Pharos of Alexandria in Egypt, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Herbert Wadsworth, 33rd degree, expanded on Corbett's motifs in the Scottish Rite Journal of October 1991. The exterior of this impressive monument to our first president is based on what is known of the design of the ancient lighthouse of Alexandria, Egypt. Having gained its inspiration from this famous structure, the architect of the George Washington Masonic National Memorial proceeded to add many symbolic elements of importance and interest to Masons. An example of this is the careful blending of all 5 orders of architecture, Doric, Ionic, and Corinthian, respectively, on the 3 exterior levels of the tower, composite in the building's memorial hall, and Tuscan in the assembly hall. Doric is repeated again in the auditorium and on the portico. Scottish Rite Southern Jurisdiction Grand Commander George F. Moore, 33rd degree, attended the association's inaugural meeting representing both the Supreme Council, Southern Jurisdiction, and the Grand Lodge of Tennessee as a past Grand Master. Secretary General John H. Cowles, 33rd degree, also attended the annual sessions, representing Kentucky, and later served as Grand Commander when he succeeded Moore. Despite his busy schedule, Cowles eagerly served on memorial committees. As Ways and Means Committee Chairman, Cowles provided annual reports on the association's fundraising efforts. During the Supreme Council's next biennial session, On October 19, 1911, the body passed a resolution to support the new association and enroll itself in their new Roll of Honor with a donation of $100. Be it resolved that the Supreme Council, Southern Jurisdiction, Scottish Rite Masons, sanction and approve the erection of the said memorial and the formation of said National Masonic Association, recommending it to the favorable consideration of all consistories, chapters, and other subordinate bodies and individual members of the Southern Jurisdiction, Scottish Rite Masons, and, by this resolution, declare this Supreme Council to be a member of the George Washington Masonic National Memorial Association. Cowell's fundraising efforts and committee work prompted the association to elect him as their treasurer on February 22, 1914. He now served in this role along with his usual duties as the Supreme Council's Secretary General. While association representatives continued to fundraise, they were nowhere near their $500,000 goal for the building. In 1917, Cowles reported that the association had raised only $50,000. His report prompted Grand Commander Moore to lobby the Supreme Council for a more significant donation of $10,000, or about $230,000 adjusted for inflation, which the Council approved on October 18, 1917. Moore and Cowles hoped this would spur further giving by other national bodies. Cowles resigned as treasurer in June 1921. J. Claude Kuiper, a past Grand Master of the District of Columbia, assumed his duties while also serving as the association's secretary. Kuiper was a prominent leader in local and national Masonic circles. During his tenure as the district's Grand Master in 1911, he laid the cornerstone of the Supreme Council's House of the Temple. Kuiper performed both duties so well that the association formally elected him as secretary-treasurer at the next meeting on February 22, 1922. He remained in this position for the next 22 years, until his death on November 19, 1944. Grand Commanders Cowles and Leon M. Abbott, the latter of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction, participated in the cornerstone laying ceremony on November 1, 1923. The Northern Masonic jurisdiction also made several significant donations towards the memorial in the early years, which totaled $75,000 by 1932. Construction progressed steadily through the 1920s, even as the country experienced significant economic crises following the stock market crash in October 1929. While the association scheduled the formal dedication ceremonies for May 1932, the Alexandria Scottish Rite bodies occupied completed rooms in the memorial as early as 1929. A joint Scottish Rite degree conferral was performed by the Alexandria and Washington, D.C. valleys in late May 1930. To mark the special occasion, 3 special gavels were produced with wood taken from the timbers supporting the original roof of the White House, removed during the Coolidge administration. During its biennial session in October 1931, the Supreme Council approved another $25,000 donation, or $499,000 adjusted for inflation, to complete construction on the memorial's auditorium prior to the building's formal dedication on May 12, 1932. While heavy rain prompted many to skip the dedication ceremony, Grand Commanders Cowles and Frederick B. Stevens of the Northern Masonic jurisdiction both attended the ceremony along with other Scottish Rite Masons, including the Valley of Washington, D.C.'s Albert Pike Camp Guard. President Herbert Hoover also attended the dedication ceremony held in the completed auditorium. Since then, countless Scottish Rite Masons from across the United States have visited the memorial and contributed regularly toward the memorial's activities. Since its inception, prominent Scottish Rite Masons have made great contributions to the association's effort to build a lasting monument to George Washington and Freemasonry. The landmark serves as an early example of effective cooperation between state Grand Lodges and national appendant bodies like the ancient and accepted Scottish Rite. In 2023, Masons will gather again from all over to witness the rededication of this cornerstone. On Monday, February 20th, Masons will march in the city of Alexandria's annual Washington's Birthday Parade, and, afterwards, the Grand Lodge of Virginia will reenact the cornerstone ceremony on the memorial's front steps. All are welcome to join in the celebration. To register or to see the complete schedule of Cornerstone's centennial events, see the memorial's website at www.gwmemorial.org. As an added feature to the Scottish Rite Journal podcast, I had the privilege to speak with Br Chris Ruli regarding his article. Hope you enjoy it. In our day and age of spreadsheets and virtually every single way imaginable to compile and collect information, what plan was made on how to receive donations? And was it just put the word out to the world, see who contributes to the building of this monument?
Yeah, so the association, when it formed, it basically formed with representatives from the different Grand Lodges, right? And so you had Grand Masters, past Grand Masters, whoever showed up served as the representative of their Grand Lodge. And so the association created this committee called the Ways and Means Committee, and it effectively became the committee that was in charge of collecting funds and reporting donations and stuff like that. And so every year they would assign, different committee roles. And so, representatives who attended basically served as the liaison from the association to their respective Grand Lodge. They were sort of in charge of collecting funds, raising funds, talking about the project, really serving as the main liaison. And so certain, Grand Lodge representatives, did the work themselves. They may have appointed or had assistants that were really collecting the money. And so in many ways, it was sort of haphazard, depending on the state, depending on the person. Some representatives or some Grand Lodges had multiple representatives. So it really depended on, that type of arrangement.
Not unlike what we see today, as far as very similar.
Yeah, I mean, I think the association was more concerned about getting money quickly to start working on the project. So to them, it was just like, you're the representative, you figure it out.
Right.
Go to your Grand Lodge and figure it out. Either collect it from the Grand Lodge, have the Grand Lodge collect the money, go to individual lodges, go to individual people or groups and raise that money.
So how were they able to maintain both a steady construction schedule as well as continuing, to receive contributions, all of this during the Great Depression?
Yeah, and that was one of the things that when I was writing this article, I was curious about too, because in my mind, they completed the memorial during the Great Depression, right? In 1932, they dedicated the memorial. And so that's what the stock market crash began on 29. October 1929.
Yeah.
But the memorial didn't start in sort of practice, or they didn't start really collecting and raising funds. They collected and started raising funds about a decade earlier. So in 1918, for example, I went through the old proceedings and I found in 1918, they collected about $70,000 worth of money. And then between 1918 to 1929, they actually basically collected the majority of the money that they needed. And when you look at how much it cost, it cost around, or they raised around $2.7 million by the time they got to 1929, just 1929, when the stock market, or right around the time the stock market crashes. And so if you adjust that, I actually went and did the adjustment for inflation. By 1929, just as the stock market crashed, they raised over $47 million.
Wow.
So really, in a sense, the association got really lucky because most of the fundraising was done before the stock market crash. Now, they had those funds, and then really the difficulty came afterwards, where it was, okay, well, we've completed about 60 to 70% of the memorial. We just have that 30% left. Let's get to that spot. And so to me, it's very remarkable that they didn't just close or end the project right where they could. They were able to do the fundraising efforts about 3 years into the memorial. So, or 3 years after the stock market crashed. And by 1932, they were able to dedicate it. So I guess in a sense, that question is sort of easy to answer because 80% of the project was done by 1929 in terms of collecting the money and then developing the building.
Well, I guess there was still the possibility, though, had they tried to invest that money to earn more, there was the potential of losing it.
Yeah. I mean, and the way that if I understand the proceedings and if I'm reading the proceedings correctly, some of that, of course, was not completely used, right? And so every year they collected about $200,000 to $300,000 in those years' terms. Now, in our adjusted for inflation terms, they collected roughly every year about $4 million.
Wow.
And so most of that money went right into construction and all the construction efforts associated. And so it's not like they retained 4 million and then they started. The money was coming in, and it was going out to pay for construction and all the other related costs associated to construction.
Yeah, I wonder if they sat around in hindsight and went, wow, glad we spent it as we got it.
Yeah, I think they've got relatively speaking, in hindsight, right? You can say that they got very lucky because the project was about 80 to 70% done. The construction part, not the installation, the furniture, all that other things. Those things were still things that they needed to focus on. But for the most part, they collected about $47 million by 1929. If they started this project a decade later and said, well, we're going to save all this money and then we're going to invest it, and then maybe we'll start in 1925 or 1927, let's say. Right. This might be a different scenario.
Sure. Yeah. Or it could have never happened at all, for that matter.
Right.
So what lodge was Brother Corbett a member of, and what was his level of activity as a Freemason?
Yeah, so Corbett submits, or his company, his architecture firm, submits the design for the memorial around 1917, his initial design, this idea of this, Lighthouse of Alexandria style design in 1917. He becomes a Mason in New York through Sagamore Lodge 371. He submits his petition somewhere in November or December of 1921. So this is 4 or 5 years after he is working on this project. And so he is initiated as an entered apprentice December 7th, 1921. He goes through the fellowcraft in February 1922. And then maybe through dispensation, he received a dispensation to complete to get his Master Mason degree 14 days later, so 2 weeks later on February 15th, 1922. So by 1922, he is officially a craft Mason, a Blue Lodge Mason. And I wasn't able to find any information on his Scottish Rite. If he did join the Scottish Rite through New York, he would have gone through the Northern Masonic jurisdiction.
Did he influence any future well-known architects or future Masonic buildings?
Corbett's designs were very unique because it was an Art Deco design, right? And so it was very much consistent with that time frame, right? That Art Deco, that Art Nouveau time frame. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that he inspired other Masons, if he did, other Masonic architects. If he did, I certainly am not aware of it. I think what he did was he looked to the Library of Alexandria. He looked to the designs, or the sort of inspirational designs that have been written or drawn about the lighthouse. Sorry, not library, the Lighthouse of Alexandria, and he used that as his reference. Now, if there are lodges that really look to that, I'm not really sure I know about it. But Corbett's initial design for the memorial looks a little different than what we have now. So if you actually see that 1917 design, or his proposal, you'll see that it's a little wider at the top, and in the new design, or the design that we have now, or the building that we have now, it sort of angles and narrows at the top. And so that's a function of design and interest and iterations of that initial Corbett design. Yeah.
And because of that building going up in Alexandria, and I'm sure it caught the eye of everyone around there, especially during the construction. Right. Was there any sort of noticeable increase in either Blue Lodge or Scottish Rite Masonry once it was completed and open?
Yeah, what's interesting, when the building was dedicated in 1932, it was now 3 or 4 years into the Great Depression, and so I think that unfortunately that caused the fraternity to be in a difficult situation, because it was actually losing membership, right? So in DC, for example, just across the river, Masons were actually either being dropped for MPD or not interested, or they were focusing on the economy and really they were prioritizing the effects of the Great Depression. And so it wasn't until later that we see increases. So overall, there was a decrease after the Great Depression, but that didn't last long, because once World War II hit, and then we sort of get get out of World War II, we see that bump into membership.
Right.
Now, that said, the memorial served as a cool place to visit. It served as another, in addition to the House of the Temple, when people visited DC, Masons would go to the House of the Temple, or they would go perhaps to the White House or Congress, the Capitol. And so this became another interesting place to go. It became a place where Masons can congregate and meet. So it became a place where Masons wanted to visit. And obviously it remains that today. When Masons visit DC or Northern Virginia, they obviously want to go to the memorial and check that out.
And aside from President Hoover, were there any other notable politicians or celebrities in attendance at the dedication?
So Hoover was present at the dedication in 1932. The Cornerstone ceremony, which we are celebrating this year in February, is the original Cornerstone ceremony. Calvin Coolidge was the president, and so he actually participated with his wife, along with Chief Justice and former President William Howard Taft. Now, at the time when the Memorial Association began, Taft was president, and he was a Mason, and so they invited Taft, and Taft did attend the first association meeting. And if you go back into the proceedings, as well as this really great history book that was written about the memorial, I think it was published in the 1970s by a brother named William Adrian Brown. He wrote this sort of history about the construction of the memorial. You'll notice that Brown wrote that the association wanted to make Taft the president of the association as like an honorary position. Taft declined it because, he didn't feel like he would have time to dedicate it to it. And so he sort of served as the memorial's patron for many years. And in fact, even after he left the White House, he remained as a patron and would also try to help and support. And so Taft and Coolidge, participated in the Cornerstone ceremony in 23, in 23. Now, Coolidge became president because he was vice president under Warren G. Harding, and Harding died earlier that summer. Mm-hmm. So had Harding not died in California, Harding would have been the president at that ceremony. And by the way, Harding was a Freemason. And so, had Harding survived, he probably would have spoke, and he probably would have, performed part of the Cornerstone ceremony himself. Coolidge declined to speak that day. He just wanted to participate with his wife and other dignitaries quietly, just to, just watch as the Masons laid the cornerstone. But had Harding survived, he would have likely participated and maybe spoke and maybe did more things than Coolidge would have done.
Like and share this article, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. If you wish to comment, please leave one, and as a reminder, hit the notifications bell. Any accompanying photographs or citations for this article can be found in the corresponding print edition. The Scottish Rite Journal is published by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World, Br Stock, 32nd Degree, KCCH, Managing Editor. I'm your host, Matt Bowers.